the Bogosity podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the week of June 9, 2024, the podcast that lost on Jeopardy! This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's recolonize the news of the bogus. Let's start off with a story that's both an update and a correction. Last week we brought you the story about Congress trying to make Justice Samuel Alito recuse himself from all Trump and Jan 6 cases because his wife, Martha Ann, flew a couple of flags. Now we've got a lot more details about it. She flew an upside-down U.S. flag, which is done in times of national distress, and the implication was she did it because of the Trump trial and possibly even the verdict. She also flew the pine tree flag commissioned under George Washington. Turns out, she flew these flags years ago in something that had nothing to do with Trump or Jan 6, but was a private dispute with her neighbor. Martha Ann is also not a party to any of the cases coming forward and never even expressed an opinion about the cases, but Democrats don't seem to care about that. Alito is responsible for flags his wife flew. Oh, and it turns out they were flown not on their main residence, but at a summer home owned by her, not him. And since one of those flags was also flown around the same time as the Gadsden flag, which was flown by J6 protesters, then Alito has to recuse. Please tell me they don't really believe that. If so, they're even dumber than I thought. But no, it's all about finding an excuse to force Alito, Thomas, and even apparently Roberts from these cases. That would give the liberal justices greater say in the decisions. And we now have the full letter Alito sent to the Senate where he wrote, I am confident that a reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or a desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases would conclude that the events recounted above do not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I am therefore required to reject your request. Required! Take that, Senator Bozos! He also mentioned not being aware of the Stop the Steal people flying the pine tree flag, and I'm not either. I looked, and all the pics I could find of the protests had no pine tree flag in them. If any of the protesters were carrying them, it wasn't very prominent and hardly a symbol of the movement. Having nothing else going for them, Congressman Jamie Raskin apparently took to the pages of the New York Times to make the appeal for their recusal, which, as we covered earlier, was so broad it could apply to any justice, and any cases involving Trump, Biden, or Jan 6 would be argued before an empty bench. The issue is, when lower court judges recuse themselves, there's always another judge who can step in and take their place. That's not the case with Supreme Court justices, so as the only court specified in the Constitution, their criteria for recusal needs to survive strict scrutiny. It's also blatant hypocrisy. Ruth Bader Ginsburg criticized Trump for not releasing his tax returns, but she didn't recuse herself from that case, and no one in Congress demanded that she did. Really, what reason do they have for doing this other than knowing their case is terrible and they're going to lose? If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odyssey.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odyssey is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odyssey to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odyssey.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. And now a story that shows us, unlike other stories we've covered about how courts are becoming more and more corrupt, they're also becoming dumber. This time, a judge pitched a hissy fit over the font a lawyer was using. Over his 25-year career practicing law in Chicago, Jason Epstein has never had a single complaint about him using his favorite font, Bernhard Modern. You'll recognize this type as the one used in the end credits of the classic Twilight Zone. In a decision, the 7th Circuit opined that lawyers chose typefaces suitable for books and long-form presentations. As a nice, weighty serif font, Mod fits the bill, but they didn't like it. They recommended typefaces such as New Baskerville, Book Antiqua, Callisto, Century Schoolbook, Bookman Old Style, and then literally said, quote, "Any face with the word book in its name is likely to be good for legal work." So that's the problem? Bernhard Modern doesn't have book in its name? Quote, Jason R. Epstein, who represents Acima Design, did not heed this advice. His brief is said in Bernhard Modern, a display face suited to movie posters and used in the title sequence of the Twilight Zone TV show. Wikipedia explains, a somewhat decorative text typeface, it is distinct for its low X height, elongated ascenders, and relatively short descenders, giving it an appearance of height without requiring excessive leading. Serifs are wide and splayed. Those are not characteristics that conduce to easy reading of long passages. They do realize the typefaces can serve two purposes, right? My Fonts describes it as, quote, a perennial bestseller, Bernhard Modern remains popular in a wide variety of design and typesetting uses more than 60 years after its initial release. And among the tags for the font include legible, natural, magazine, and yes, books. Love to the mod! And the dumbest thing is, they tried to make their point by including a couple of paragraphs of the text in mod and showed it to be just as readable, if not more so, than Palatino, the one they used that also doesn't have book in its name. They also wrote, we hope that Bernhard Modern has made its last appearance in an appellate brief. Geez. I mean, I could understand it if he wrote it in Comic Sans or Papyrus. The 7th Circuit has their own 7-page typography standards, which show quite clearly they don't know the first thing about typography. Take it from someone who is educated on the subject. I've got my own expertise to draw on here. It's almost as dumb as the DC Circuit, which, a couple of years ago, discouraged the use of Garamond, one of the most readable and most respected typefaces of the last few centuries, ever since Claude Garamond designed it in the 1500s. I mean, Microsoft's monotype Garamond is pretty bad because they changed a lot of the readability characteristics. Just stay away from Microsoft fonts in general, okay? Use Helvetica, not Arial. Don't get me started. So what's Epstein gonna do now? He's lost his appeal, so he's deciding whether to ask the circuit for an en banc appeal. And he said he would be required to, quote, use the most legible face available to you. If Bernhard Mod is still the easiest to read, I would be compelled to use it. That ought to be fun to see. Might have to keep an eye on it just to see what font he uses. Maybe try Open Dyslexic. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. So we covered the lies Anthony Fauci told Congress and the public during COVID, and we also covered how he knew he was lying. Finally, it looks like the first step towards holding him accountable may actually happen. He appeared in front of the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic for a 2-day, 14-hour interview behind closed doors where he confirmed his previous testimony but refused to accept any responsibility. In particular, he reaffirmed testimony that the 6 feet apart social distancing recommendation was arbitrary, not based on any science, and, quote, just sort of appeared. The subcommittee said in a press release, quote, Dr. Fauci showed no remorse for the millions of lives affected by his divisive rhetoric and his unscientific policies. He did not apologize to the thousands of Americans who lost their jobs because they refused the novel vaccine, nor did he apologize to children experiencing severe learning loss as a result of actions he promoted. Dr. Fauci confirmed that his senior advisor, Dr. David Morenz, violated official NIH policies and potentially broke federal law. He deliberately obstructed the Select Subcommittee's investigation into the origins of COVID-19, unlawfully deleted federal COVID-19 records, and shared non-public information about NIH grant processes with his best friend, EcoHealth Alliance President Dr. Peter Daszak. Dr. Fauci maintained his misleading claim that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. Dr. Fauci agreed with the Select Committee that EcoHealth and its president, Dr. Peter Daszak, should never again receive a single cent from the U.S. taxpayer. Dr. Fauci corrected his previous testimony that his staff did not possess conflicts of interest. During his transcribed interview, he claimed, "The only people that I am involved with is my own staff, who we've mentioned many times in this discussion, who don't have a conflict of interest." During yesterday's hearing, he changed his tune, testifying that Dr. Morenz definitely had a conflict of interest. And Dr. Fauci publicly acknowledged that the lab leak hypothesis was possible and not a conspiracy theory. And listen to what he said in the subcommittee's public hearing.
Doctor, why was it so important that the virus not have started in a lab?
We don't know where it started, and that's the reason why I keep an open mind. So I don't know what you mean by why was it so important. It wasn't important.
Well, you still don't know where it started? The guys you gave money to figured out in 3 days.
No.
Mr. Anderson said on January 31st, 2020, virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. The very next day, Dr. Gary said, I don't know how this happens in nature. It'd be easy to do in a lab. And then 3 days later, Shazam, they switch and say it has to be nature. So they figured out in 3 days, but you still don't know?
No, in fact, if you look at what they were saying, Congressman Jordan, they were saying that it was not a manufactured virus. It still could have evolved out of a lab.
Well, let me read something here to you.
They're not incompatible.
In our study on the censorship of the Biden administration working with big tech, I want to read you a WhatsApp message from Mark Zuckerberg. Can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? Here's another email to Mark Zuckerberg. It says, subject line, COVID misinformation, Wuhan lab leak theory. In response to continued public pressure and tense conversations with the new administration, we started removing 5 COVID claims, including the lab leak theory. Mr. Zuckerberg responds, this seems like a good reminder that when we compromise our standards due to pressure from an administration in either direction, we often later regret it. Why was it so important the virus not have started in a lab?
wasn't so important that the virus we don't know. We know
it was important to someone in the Biden administration, so much so that the top people at Meta, the top people at Facebook are asking, why are we getting all this pressure to downplay the lab leak theory? And we have an email from June of the same year, June 4th, 2021, saying the same thing. It was certainly important to somebody.
Well, what has that got to do with me?
I'm asking you because you're the expert on the coronavirus. I'm saying, why was the administration so pushing not to have the lab leak theory as something that was viable?
I can answer that. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
You kept an open mind. Dr. Fauci, open mind.
That is correct.
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
I'm sorry.
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
Yes, of course. It was a sub-award to the Wuhan Institute.
And who approved that award?
Excuse me?
And who approved that award? What agency approved that award?
National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Your agency approved that, right?
Yes, it did.
Did that have anything to do with this downplaying of the lab leak theory?
No.
Nothing to do with it?
Nothing.
What do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country find that amazing.
Search the archives to know what blatant gaslighting that is. Now hear what he said to Dr. John Joyce about the 6-foot rule.
Dr. Fauci, one of the controversial regulations of the pandemic was the 6-foot distancing rule. This rule became an important policy consideration in subsequent regulations. However, you testified recently, and I'm quoting, this 6-foot rule sort of just appeared. Do you think that a rule that sort of just appeared is substantial justification for the regulations that we saw based on that 6-foot rule?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I answered that, but I'll summarize it briefly for you. When saying it just appeared, it came from the CDC.
Okay, you stated that earlier. What was your relationship with the CDC when you saw a regulation which was not based in the current science?
Well, when I say was not based in science, I meant a prospective clinical trial to determine whether 6 foot was better than 3, was better than 10.
But once we realized that the virus was not spread by droplets and was aerosolized, did you feel an indication to go back to the CDC and said, let's base this on science. Let's get rid of this 6-foot rule. This 6-foot rule crippled businesses. It allowed students to stay at home and not learn. Americans suffered. And that suffering continues because the fracture of trust in American scientists continues to this day. Did you not feel an obligation for something that just sort of appeared, not to go back to the CDC and say, let's base this on what we know?
It was a CDC decision, and it was clear.
Were you dialoguing with the CDC?
Excuse me?
Were you in communication with the CDC?
CDC was part of the coronavirus response team. Yeah.
And you didn't feel an obligation to go to them and say, look, Americans aren't going to trust us. Yeah. We're providing them with misinformation.
We have discussions at the White House about that. We did. But the CDC's decision and was their decision to make, and they made it.
And you didn't feel an obligation as the lead scientist at the NIH to challenge that?
I've challenged the CDC multiple times.
Publicly on this regard?
Excuse me?
Publicly you challenged them on the 6-foot distancing rule?
It is not appropriate to be publicly challenging a sister organization.
Oh, really? How interesting. Give everyone terrible information that dramatically damages their lives so you don't make each other look bad.
Do you agree that Americans now have lost their trust in science, in lead science from government because of misinformation like this?
Well, when you talk about misinformation, I think that you have to be careful. It's not disinformation. It was information that ultimately proved, when you put the aerosolization in, that
it was not an effective rule to have 6 feet of distancing.
Yeah, whatever, Fauci. Now, about Morenz and Daszak.
Do you realize that this impact still considers today? This is your lead trusted researcher who works with you, your advisor. Do you realize the impact of that?
It was a terrible thing. It was wrong, and it was inappropriate.
Thank you.
I
think we all agree it was incredibly inappropriate. Dr. Fauci, would you agree that this demonstrates the need for more accountability and increased oversight of NIAID?
What you saw, I believe, with Dr. Morin's was an aberrancy and an outlier. The individuals at the NIH and NIAID are of a very committed group of individuals, and this one instance that you point out is an aberrancy and an outlier. That does
from your senior advisor for 20 years.
Well, the title is senior advisor. We wrote scientific papers together. He didn't advise me, as I mentioned.
Are your senior advisors not trusted staff?
Again, I told you that his title was senior advisor, but he is not an advisor on policy.
That's very confusing to have someone's title and not having that to be their obligation.
But that is the fact, though.
I think that supports what we said. There needs to be more oversight and there needs to be more accountability.
There's a lot more, but this segment has gone on long enough, especially since we have an extra segment this week. But check the links. You can also hear Rich McCormick pressing Fauci on how he, quote, believed an institution should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. James Comer pressed him on the misbehavior of other staff members, not just Marin's. And Michael Cloud pushed him, saying,
this is one of the things that's really troubling to the American people, because they look at their lives being destroyed and there's no one to hold accountable, because these systems of accountability have become systems of plausible deniability. And so your name is on every single grant, but yet you absolve yourself of any sort of responsibility by saying, well, it goes to this committee that's, that has a number of people on it and they're approved en bloc. And so there's no accountability for anything, any of the taxpayer dollars that are going forth.
Hopefully that'll change, but if nothing else, we can clearly see how, as if we couldn't before, why Fauci isn't to be trusted and how to spot people like him in the future. Let's never fall for this again. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. And now it's time to renormalize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. We haven't been covering the case of the Pfizer whistleblower because not a lot has been going on. The case was thrown out, but then the appeals court threw it back in. And despite the fact that there are motions going back and forth, there's no actual motion on the case itself. But we do have this bit of craziness from Google, courtesy of tech journalist Brian Lunduke, who nowadays seems to be one of the few tech journalists covering this kind of thing. Google censored the files of the Pfizer whistleblower from Google Drive and gave reasons that were completely and utterly bogus. It's not clear if fellow whistleblower Melissa McAtee is going to be part of the case yet, but either way, she prepared a PowerPoint presentation of her testimony and uploaded it to Google Drive. It contained documents and emails from her time at Pfizer, and she used this link to share the file with others. 15 days later, Google sent McAtee an email saying that the file, quote, contains content that may violate Google Drive's dangerous and illegal activities policy, which is absolute balderdash. Worst case scenario, the information in the file is false. There's no reasonable way it could be dangerous. The relevant part of Google's policy says, quote, do not use this product to engage in illegal activities or to promote activities, goods, services, or information that cause serious and immediate harm to people or animals. While we permit general information for educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic purposes about this content, we draw the line when the content directly facilitates harm or encourages illegal activity. We will take appropriate action if we are notified of unlawful activities, which may include reporting you to the relevant authorities, removing access to some of our products, or disabling your Google account. Lunduk reached out to McAtee to get a copy of the file, and he's posted slides of it to his local site. It's mostly notated screenshots of corporate emails and policy documents. There's no obvious reason at the moment why Google would have censored the file, because it's clear that it does not violate the dangerous and illegal activity clause in any way. None of it advocates any harm at all. None of it encourages illegal activities, and the file itself is not illegal because whistleblowing is a perfectly legal activity. We also don't know how the determination was made. Did Pfizer request it? Was it because of politics at Google? Or was this an automated system that goofed up, as so often happens with Google services? Lunduk reached out to Google and Pfizer and got no reply. But the sad part is, this is far from the only censorship that Google is doing, and they're not the only one either. So you really can't trust Google for hosting these kinds of files. There are other companies with better non-censorship stances, such as Rumble, Locals, and Substack, but who knows if they'll ever change their minds, maybe with a change in leadership, and suddenly start censoring all over the place. Google used to be very good with free speech issues, remember? You could self-host, but that brings a lot of issues too. Your hosting provider can start censoring, for example. Hosting it on your own hardware at home raises all sorts of security issues. Odyssey has announced that they have a fully decentralized solution which will come by rebuilding their site on Arweave, a completely decentralized solution for storing files and building websites. That's pretty much the only kind of thing you're going to be able to trust, private and decentralized. But above all, keep a copy of your files. Do not rely on anyone or anywhere else to keep them for you, and especially not Google. So all of that makes Google this week's biggest Bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now, a rare treat that keeps getting rarer, we have a new recipient of the Silver Cluon Award. And these can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time, just if they manage to hit on just the right thing. A simple, inconvenient truth told so simply and directly that you just have to admire it. And this time, it goes to Adam Conover. If you look at the Discord, we've mostly been critical of Adam Ruins Everything because of a lot of things the show just gets wrong. In my opinion, the shows generally end up being 1/3 good, 1/3 wrong, and the other third is a toss-up. Some episodes get it more right than others. But this isn't about the show itself, but how to watch it. And that was supposed to be less of an issue with online streaming. With disk space and internet speeds getting cheaper and cheaper, there's nothing stopping all sorts of old shows from getting new love. And for a while, that seemed to be the case, back when you could get Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime and basically be covered. But now that basically every studio needs its own streaming service, it's gotten a lot more complicated. A few months ago, Adam Ruins Everything disappeared from HBO Max, leaving fans to wonder where they could watch it. And that's sort of the opposite of what it was supposed to be. HBO having its own streaming service meant that you'd always have the show available. Turns out, not so much. Hannah Stars the Flower Goddess asked Adam on X, quote, "Is there anywhere one can watch Adam Ruins Everything without needing a cable subscription or one of those YouTube TV subscription type things that's like cable?" Adam responded, "Adam Ruins Everything was removed from Max last year, despite the fact that many people still watch the show. The best way to watch the show currently is to buy a season pass on Amazon or iTunes. When that fails, BitTorrent." Wow! What a nice sideways slap at the state of streaming today. Because unlike dedicated streaming services, piracy really is reliable. Adam is a comedian, and it's those sort of comic takes that can get away with saying what you really couldn't any other way. If he had said, "Just pirate my show on BitTorrent," he could have been censored or even slapped with a lawsuit for advocating illegal activity, specifically pirating a show, even if it's his show. The show was canceled in 2019 despite high viewing numbers. Adam attributes that to the Warner Media consolidation of truTV, HBO, TNT, and TBS. It doesn't even seem personal. HBO removed dozens of shows from its platform to save costs. And this came as Amazon Prime started showing ads to paying customers. At the time, Adam tweeted, "Remember when the promise of streaming was an endless library where even niche shows would be watchable forever? Now, because of the merger, HBO Max is deleting dozens of shows just to save money on taxes and residuals. A needless, shameful waste." It's not just disk space and connection speed. There are rules that say that every time you play an episode, actors get residuals, music royalties get paid, government gets taxes, and all the producers get a cut. Music has been a big problem, which is why on streaming platforms the Britcom Absolutely Fabulous had to ditch its theme song, This Wheel's on Fire. So how can you reliably watch any of this? Adam brilliantly pointed out that the only reliable backup to any of this is piracy. And as we've pointed out repeatedly, the harder and more expensive the big studios make it to watch legally, the more people pirate. And they don't ever seem to learn the lesson. So enjoy your shiny new silver Cluon, Adam, and don't worry, we won't charge residuals for it. And now let's accreditate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals for completely missing the point of Supreme Court precedents and even their own precedents. A year ago, we covered the Supreme Court's decision in the 303 Creative case, the one vindicating a website designer who refused to design a website celebrating gay marriage. Basically, the First Amendment trumps the protections that certain classes enjoy in this country. The thing to remember before you go criticizing cases like this as being bigoted or whatever is, flip the parties around and see if it still makes sense. Well, that's what's literally happened here in American Alliance for Equal Rights v. Fearless Fund Management. And here's a case where you can really sympathize with both parties. The Alliance is dedicated to ending racial inequalities, whereas Fearless is a venture capital fund investing in businesses run by women of color. Both are very laudable goals. But where they ran headlong into each other is when the Alliance represented women who weren't included into the fund because of their race, alleging that the fund violated 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, prohibiting racial discrimination when making or enforcing contracts. But Fearless is all about giving opportunities to underrepresented groups. So, in a way, racial discrimination is what they're all about, if it's an area that people of certain races have more difficulty breaking into. So Fearless offers a competitive application process where 4 winners will get $20,000 apiece and tools to assist with growing their business, including mentorship. To qualify, a business must be at least 51% black woman-owned. It reminds me a lot of the Fine Young Capitalists, a group we covered back when the Gamergate controversy started up. Kathy Gellis has a good rundown of the issues in a TechDirt article, the main one being that Fearless has a First Amendment right to choose where to direct its resources. Freedom of association means that they can decide who is included as potential winners, and that trumps Section 1981. But that isn't what the 11th Circuit found, ruling contrary to 303 Creative and several other precedents as well. The idea of 303 Creative is that the state's interest in countering discrimination cannot override a constitutional right. But the 11th Circuit misinterpreted that as a balance between status and message, which wasn't at all what the Supreme Court said. The 11th Circuit bemoaned that the line between status and message was hard to draw, but the fact is they didn't even try. Even if that had been the precedent, they would have failed miserably. And a major precedent that's mysteriously missing from their analysis is Boy Scouts of America v. Dale, where SCOTUS upheld the right of the Boy Scouts to exclude homosexuals on the grounds that anti-discrimination laws violate their right of expressive association. Remember that your right to associate includes your right to disassociate. Forced association is against the First Amendment, and it is by far the case that most closely mirrors Fearless. Another relevant case is Hurley v. Irish American Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Group of Boston, where SCOTUS upheld the right of a group holding a parade from excluding members expressing a message the group didn't want conveyed. Just listen to how badly they missed the point. Quote, "The fact remains, though, that Fearless simply and flatly refuses to entertain applications from business owners who aren't black females. If that refusal were deemed sufficiently expressive to warrant protection under the Free Speech Clause, then so would be every act of race discrimination, no matter at whom it was directed. And on Fearless's theory, the more blatant and rampant the discrimination, the clearer the message. To take just one particularly offensive example, surely a business owner who summarily fires all his black employees while retaining all the white ones has, at the very least, telegraphed his perspective on racial equality." Yeah, he has, hasn't he? Kinda like what we libertarians have been saying all this time, isn't it? But the expression stemming from the act of racism itself has nothing to do with it. Like the parade, like Boy Scouts, and like 303 Creative, the message went beyond merely who you were doing business with and went to the message you were working with them to convey. It's an obvious distinction that they missed entirely. There's a difference between baking a cake for a gay couple and making a cake with a gay wedding message on it. There's a difference between making a website for a gay couple and making a website celebrating gay marriage. There's a difference between holding a parade and using the parade to express a message you disagree with. That is the fundamental difference between discrimination and expressive association. The 11th Circuit even distorted its own precedent. Quote, "The district court also cited our decision in Coral Ridge Ministries Media v. Amazon.com for the propositions that donating money qualifies as expressive conduct and that, except in perhaps the rarest of circumstances, no person in this country may be compelled to subsidize speech by a third party that he or she does not want to support." Coral Ridge is triply inapposite. First, our decision there had nothing to do with race discrimination, and Supreme Court precedent indicates that prohibitions on race discrimination are uniquely resistant to First Amendment challenges. Second, for reasons already explained, Fearless isn't simply donating money. It's orchestrating a bargained-for exchange in which both parties obtain valuable benefits and undertake meaningful obligations. Finally, Fearless isn't being compelled to subsidize speech. Rather, the question here is whether Fearless's contest ought to receive First Amendment protection by virtue of its rule excluding non-black entrants. Coral Ridge has nothing useful to say about that. Well, if they'd bothered to read the case, they would have seen, quote, "The parties do not dispute that donating money qualifies as expressive conduct. Indeed, it is bedrock principle that, except perhaps in the rarest of circumstances, no person in this country may be compelled to subsidize speech by a third party that he or she does not wish to support. And that includes when it's applied in a way that's discriminatory. Quote, Hurley is analogous to this case in that Coral Ridge's proposed interpretation of Title II would violate the First Amendment. In the same way that the council's choice of parade units was expressive conduct, so too is Amazon's choice of what charities are eligible to receive donations through Amazon Smile. Applying Title II in the way Coral Ridge proposes would not further the statute's purpose of securing for all citizens the full enjoyment of facilities described in the Act which are open to the general public. It would instead modify the content of Amazon's expression and thus modify Amazon's speech itself by forcing it to donate to an organization it does not wish to promote. This we cannot do. The law is not free to interfere with speech for no better reason than promoting an approved message or discouraging a disfavored one, however enlightened either purpose may strike the government. By the way, Coral Ridge Ministries is that whack job religious group founded by young earth creationist nutcase D. James Kennedy. So you sympathize with Amazon. Coral Ridge has a First Amendment right to exercise their screwball religion, but Amazon doesn't have to support it. In short, 303 Creative, properly read, should have stopped the plaintiff's claim in its tracks. It's only the 11th Circuit's tortured reading of it and other precedents, while ignoring still others, that let them pretend it said the opposite of what it did. Of course, it'd be really nice to have universal acknowledgement of the basic humanist principle that individuals have the right to say or not say what they want, to associate or not associate with whomever they want, for whatever reason they want. Hey, I can dream, can't I? So all of that makes the 11th Circuit this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Hermits United. We meet up every 10 years and swap stories about caves edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Robert Heinlein. I believe in my whole race. Yellow, white, black, red, brown, in the honesty, courage, intelligence, durability, and goodness of the overwhelming majority of my brothers and sisters everywhere on this planet. I am proud to be a human being. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.